Opeth Blackwater Park. We're gonna do something different. I'll eventually get to my review portion of this. It'll be much later. I will timestamp it. For now, some words from Michael Eckerfeld. The new millennium came, and along with it, plenty of newfound hope. I was very excited about the band and the new lineup with Lopez and Mendez. Side note, fun fact, Lopez eventually wound up being a member, wound up forming Soen, which I believe I did get a chance to talk about them. I don't even think I did. And I forgot to put them in honorable mentions for my 2019 with their latest album. Back to this. Lopez and Mendez had gelled perfectly, and we were literally set for something quite amazing, even though that particular lineup is no more, and I'm not looking back. We did manage to create a little bit of musical history with what is going to become our fifth album, Blackwater Park. I was living in a little one-room apartment in Aspen and spent my days doing not much. Sounds like my life, actually. Anyways, Mendez and Lopez spent their days off, which was basically around 350 days per year, doing whatever they were doing. Peter was studying and going to cafes and stuff, reading and being Peter. I was partying a lot, even though I was flat broke. I have no idea how I could afford a small beer even. Maybe I was selling my body at street corners because I wasn't robbing people. I had my smokes, my coffee maker, my canned $1 meat, and my records, and my girlfriend, as well as some friends. Not sure if he's wife though. She's wife or something. I mean, I'll figure it out later. I was happy. I really was. Music was everywhere, and I was writing a lot. My friend Nick had set up a little Cubase studio in his new house, and he offered to help me out recording demos, which was great. I put together about 5 songs on paper and then set off to record them. The demo is pretty rough sounding, but you can hear some of these future Opeth classics in their embryo stages. Some of the riffs on there, however, are absolute crap. Can't believe I wrote shit like that. Luckily, I have a built-in shit defense system that will eventually weed out the fool's gold from the actual gold, metaphorically speaking. I'm not monetized, I ain't worried. It's okay, Michael. Can't remember that we were rehearsing much in that Mikal, I think is how you're supposed to pronounce it in Swedish. Also, something I also didn't realize is they're from Gothenburg, which is a very huge place for the Gothenburg sound that is melodic death metal. Just fun fact before I get to the rest of this. Can't remember that we were rehearsing much, and that probably was the case. Although, with that said, I remember we did have a brief rehearsal the day before we were supposed to drive down to Gothenburg and Studio Friedman. And after we were done, myself and Peter sat on the subway and got fucking robbed by this junkie dude who was completely out of it, yet sober enough to bring out a knife and hold it against my thigh. Fucker wanted to take my guitar, but I told him, no, I'm using it tomorrow. We're going to record a new album. For some reason, I guess, he got impressed. He let go and jumped off with a few kroner bills he'd taken from Peter. We're both shaking and laughing nervously. And then it would be too. Since then, I don't like taking the subway, which is why we have to finance my limousine trips to the grocery store by putting out reissues all the time. Here's another one, kids. Seriously though, in retrospect, if we could only choose to reissue one record out of the 9 we've done so far, this would be it. I'm sure everyone would agree on that. It's mostly about the reissue itself, honestly. But also getting a behind-the-scenes idea, aside from just this DVD itself. I'm going to just say that right now before I finish reading this here. Respect, if we could only choose to... It's not the best, not the fanciest, most clever, best-sounding album we've done. It just is something. And it's True music lovers know all that's needed for a lifelong album companion is something. Being the songwriter and whatever in Opeth means I'm always competing with my past work, and this album is probably top of the competition pile. Musically, we played much better on later records, but again, the performance here has got something. I guess what I'm saying is that we and many with us consider this album as something special. At least half the album consists of songs that many Opeth fans would call classics. The Drapery Falls, Bleak, Harvest, or Blackwater Park are all rather well-known tracks and or live favorites. Don't you agree? We'll get to that eventually. It's also the first album where we actually hired a producer. I had met with Steven Wilson. We'll even get more to that after this review. A year earlier and popped the question basically. At the time, he was the only contemporary artist I looked up to. I didn't give a fuck about anyone else apart from Porcupine Tree and my old murky record collection, which was 90% 60s and 70s stuff, and plus some old classic metal. We were never interested in working with producers since there really wasn't anyone that understood us and our music well enough and who would actually be able to contribute something of worth. SW, again, Steven was and still is extremely consistent. It's a musical oracle, an inventor, and ultimately a musical genius. To me, anyways. We're so different, though. I came from the working class and had had nothing going for me, really. I was destined to work in a factory had I not fell in love with music as I did. Steven is very educated and very intelligent overall. He's got a clue, whereas I don't. However, I'm devoted and will do things my way when it comes to the writing songs, which is why we have a sound that I guess is ours. Our meeting in a taco bar in Camden was calm, but there was a dynamic between us that I think we both immediately saw and realized we could learn and benefit from. Working together would ultimately push both bands to next level, I believe. If there is a producer I would let inside our music, it is Steven Wilson, period. Without him, I am more than happy to produce on my own with the band helping out. Recording with Steven, I'm sorry about that again. Sorry, Mr. Wilson. Sorry, Mr. Wilson. Anyway, again, we're back to that. Recording with Steven was a joy. I let some of my need for control go since I knew in his hands we'd be safe. His ideas are worth listening to. Mendez and Lopez had little to no involvement in the production, as they generally pissed off back home the day after they'd recorded their parts. So it was myself, Peter, and Steven at the helm. Peter had always let his opinion be heard and came with many good ideas, but he did definitely step back a little during Steven's stay. I'd written virtually everything, and therefore I guess it was easier for me to produce and come up with new ideas. Steven, as an outsider, saw everything in a completely different light, which I guess was very interesting for him, and again, it created a dynamic musical vibe between us. It has to be noted that Steven was only there for about 2 weeks, and he only produced lead guitars and vocals. The basic structures of the songs were already done, so he was never a Bob Rock, like there in the studio by the Gothenburg, or Berg, I'm guessing, Harbor. Everyone worked great overall. The band was in great shape at the time. Unfortunately, it would only get worse, but at the time, I tell you, we weren't fucking about. We meant business. Lyrically, the album dealt with bitterness and sheer misanthropy. I don't know where it came from, but it started building back then and hasn't got much better since. Ha ha. The title, Blackwater Park, I ripped from an old German rock band that put out an LP on Both in 1972. Just liked the sound of their name, actually more than their music. Generic purple-ish rock. basically Deep Purple. So I nicked it. In a way, I think some of my obscure band hysteria is starting to pay off on a small scale, with some of these artists finally getting a little bit of credit decades after their initial career. Included in... Hold on. And I think at this point he basically talks about the rest of basically this package. It's kind of sort of funny, I guess. We'll just basically referring to the live track edition. Something about included in this package are some extra goodies, like the film recorded and edited and It's been re-edited and given a little bit of a facelift, I guess, which they'd cleaned me up as well. Look how fucking fat and unhealthy I looked. Well, I guess I was, so now I'm ripped like Van Damme, though. I don't know about that, but we'll see how that is. Hair was real long, too. I was definitely getting a lot of B vitamins. Beer. Anyways, I think it's funny and actually gives me back the vibe that the four of us had going in those days almost 10 years ago. At the time, this was reissued in 2010. And of apparently February. And yeah, the rest of it is pretty much just him talking about the rest. So I'm not going to waste too much time on that part. But this is on behalf of Mendez, Lopez, Pierre, Frederick, and Axe. All those that were involved in this whole thing. This album is technically 8 tracks. Now we're on the review. This album is technically 8 tracks long, minus that live edition that's on this thing. This like as he had stated, this album, though he says it's not his best, believe it or not, when I went through their album discography leading up to then Sorceress, as I probably did state during that review, basically this album was the coming out, at least the first album that was finally going to start making traction stateside, since within the past 4 albums, they were starting to finally come a little bit into their own, but they felt like they weren't fully quite there, even though a lot of people nowadays, more so or less, will probably tell you that Still Life is considered their best. It's considered their best, which was their previous 4th album. Between that and My Arms Your Hearse being like amongst the earlier Opeth stuff within the 90s at least, while they were still kind of flirting with black metal elements before they just straight up were a bit more of just a progressive technical death metal. That, I guess because they're from Gothenburg, must have gained some of that Gothenburg sound that made up what is melodic death metal, that portion of melodic death metal, and it seems to kind of seep in a little bit into this sound, I guess, or at least tried to a little bit, but never quite did mixed in with the black metal element, progressive black metal elements. With this album, Nuts Reviews had put it best. It is essentially a death metal album with progressive rock elements. And some of them show up a lot more in the form of Harvest, which that one is definitely probably the most digestible song on the record, that aside from the Drapery Falls. A lot of people will say the opening title track, which definitely is a great opener on this album. To say it's the highlight in comparison to what is the title track, which they save the best for last, song for last. They give you enough good meaty stuff, at least within the first 4 tracks of this record. Urge of November, though the follow-up track, Patterns in the Ivy, is essentially just a instrumental piece. You could tell if you've listened to Steven Wilson's stuff through Porcupine Tree at the point of the 90s, even more so when they went a little bit more on the pop rock, or at least by post-Britpop standards, or basically anyone who was ripping off The Bends, Radiohead's The Bends, which was a huge influence on the latter 2 albums when they were more of a pop band before forming Blackfield. But anyways, this one to me, I had listened to him, and yet it took this record for me to finally click. And I think part of it had something to do with what I did wind up eventually getting out of listening to Porcupine Tree after finally going through Steven Wilson's stuff and then getting into this record while I was prepping for Sorceress, like I said. This album is not a concept record. I think I could tell you Bleak is at the very least about some... Most of it deals with some occult stuff, obviously. They've been known to dabble in a little bit of that into their music. A lot of it does deal with that for the most part. Bleak being more of like a... more about someone who's basically been broken up by this former lover, and it gets to the point where it drives him to the point of madness and winds up eventually basically frighteningly killing her, essentially. It's death metal, what do you expect? For most people at this point. And it's done somewhat, and musically this is the one where Steven did have a little more involvement, at least vocally. Brought what he brought through Porcupine Tree over the many years leading up to this album, it seems. And some of this would eventually affect even Steven Wilson and the work he would do within Porcupine Tree. We will get to that in a minute, because the certain particular album we're celebrating is sort of getting a reissue, and I'm going to talk about it, at least its initial release. Or at least what I can think of, which would come out, I believe, the following year in 2002. Yes, that one. Expect that review. But anyways, which was pretty good, and I do like the back and forth between Steven's vocals and Mikael Elgerfeldt's cleans, which are personally better than Steven's, or at least eventually it really starts to show within later works when he focuses more on it, and even more so on later efforts. To me, this album, despite what he has to say and what he feels from the later efforts, given my thoughts on, which I did like in my initial review, but over time I was kind of like, eh. But especially once I finally got kind of adjusted and got to hear albums like this, or Ghost Reveries, which is when they started going back to doing a concept thing. I actually even will go as far as to say the follow-up double disc, more specifically the progressive rock style Damnation, which is a better idea of them tackling that genre, which was just basically them just taking apart what they were doing here from the progressive rock and death metal aspects. And Deliverance just was mostly just playing it safe and doing this, just not nearly as well, minus the title track. And maybe like one of the softer tracks, but I would still even say Harvest here is better than that. But there was a lot, and I don't fully agree with him. There might have been some ideas that were probably meh, but for the most part, there were actually some tasty riffs on here. Or at least maybe the ones of stuff they might have left on the cutting room floor might have been the complete crap he was talking about. But and Drapery Falls is definitely it's more in the Leper Affinity, and I love the piano thing that I'm guessing Steven did bring to the table on that track. I'm guessing a little more, which I do hear a little bit of that stuff, because my first exposure had been Hand Cannot Erase. Before the eventual what he would do later, and having heard or at least even later than what he would do here. Granted, it still sucks hearing about Heritage, which I do agree it being the weakest, and I was just kind of bored with it. And I feel like they just didn't care with this one because they were busy with other projects with that one. Whereas with this album, it was just... Funeral Portrait's pretty solid. It has its moments. Dirge for November. They do what they do. But it's really just once... But it can... And for the most... And they're still good. But just... When you know what's coming... Especially when you know what's coming Blackwater Park. Just riffgasms for days. Riffgasms for days. And it's probably one of the more polished of records, or at least in that same sense that a melodeath band of the more Gothenburg sound would be able to do. but with progressive rock. That kind of death metal, I guess, but with progressive rock elements. I don't know if they were intending to sound more melodic death metal than anything. And I think they did start to take some of those aspects to heart within their specific brand of technical death metal. From that point forward, maybe not to some extent, aside from Ghost Reveries, and they never really hit as hard as well, I guess, about it, and they haven't been as good, I guess, since this record, as good since Ghost Reveries. They've come kind of close with the title track with Sorceress, and you do hear a little, and you do think that there are moments where they do get a little better, and maybe it starts to, and maybe it is better in Swedish, because I didn't get a chance to properly listen to it in Swedish, because I'm told you're supposed to, because maybe you'll hear some things differently, just aside from language barrier, but, yeah, overall, just the riffs on Blackwater Park are amazing. I mean, just go listen to it. I'm not going to get myself copyright claimed here any more than I might have wound up. Anyways, Eckerfeldt has proven himself music, and if you haven't heard from me reading this off, he's very funny. Just this album itself, you more than likely will wind up with this Legacy Edition, I guess, if you don't find a way to get whatever the original version is, which I always like these booklets. I like it when they look like a storybook. Even more when they actually give you a story. Yay. Anyways, probably a few bands that actually did bother to properly pop my cherry on the more heavier side of things, aside from Devin. I've finally tried to do so a little bit with Devin Townsend. And again, like I said, overall, you know how this is, and how this album is for most people, and yeah. I mean, of course, this is kind of a classic review anyway, so. And there are more diehard Opeth fans who more likely are praising either Ghost Reveries or Still Life over this record, will probably be telling me that, no, they did it better than this one, but this one is just a lot more polished, I guess. But what Steven Wilson brought here worked. And eventually, when they did Damnation, it translated better. When they wanted to do progressive rock, I just wish they were able to figure out how to capture what they were doing there and bring it to what they've been doing. They're kind of coming close, but not quite there. They just haven't been able to capture it, nor do something in a way that's hits the way that the earlier records had been, even with Damnation included, of course. But, like I said, this album, it is worthy of your recommendation. I've been wanting to talk about this one for a while. Even though I may not be saying much that anybody else hasn't really said already up to this point, that maybe someone of a more professional critiquing skills could do. But yes, it is a classic. I hope. What do you guys think of this record once you finally did a chance to listen to it? It's only 8 tracks, minus, Leper Affinity, I guess, if this is live version, which is fine. But you can definitely tell when it comes to live, Michael Eckerfeldt's vocals don't translate nearly as good as they do in the studio, which is sad. At least his screams don't. His cleans, yes, but that's kind of about it. And that's the only thing that is bothersome with Opeth, but other than that, they still sound just as good as they do in studio, with everything else. At least that's what I've gotten out of it. But yes, what do you guys think of this album, Blackwater Park, and just Opeth in general? Leave a comment below, let me know. As always, keep it real, keep it rocking. See you for the next one, which will either be another movie. I'm not sure I'll be able to afford to see Sonic yet, though I'm hearing good on it. I guess the people with the word of mouth that might backfire on it. I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. But overall, I enjoyed this. Well, for what it has been, Blackwater Park's riffs are just all over, like I said, the title track most specifically, and even Leper Affinity have its moments of Gotcha. And then you have your park with just some of the riffs that I even almost feel like, what if Dimebag's Tone could have done something with it? That's about the only thing that I feel curious about. If that isn't even a possibility. But which isn't even a complaint, it's just more of a curiosity thing. But anyways, that's it. And I guess, again, once more, keep it real, keep it rocking. Link to my Facebook down in the description. Like and follow me there. I've been Tyler. This is Rockin' Movies with Tyler. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care, y'all.